We'll try to jump in here. I want to thank everybody who's joined. We have about 174 people live, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of folks watching on the YouTube channel afterwards. Adam Pugh's here with us today, and I've known Adam for a long time. He is in this sort of circle of people that I tend to surround myself that are like way smarter than I am, and then I get to listen to them and leverage what they have to say. Adam's been an attorney in Austin for quite some time. We actually use him in our firm now quite a bit. But Adam, I'll let you introduce yourself and just kind of talk about your qualifications, your history, all that good stuff.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Eric. My name's Adam Pugh. I'm with the law firm of Cagle Pugh. We're based here in Austin. We have offices in Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio as well. We focus on real estate. My practice revolves around general counsel to folks like Eric and his firm. I do real estate litigation, a lot of transactional work, and we do a lot of work with homeowners associations as well. So it's kind of a wide real estate practice, and one that kind of lends itself, I think, to analyzing this federal case out of Missouri that I think is the star of the show today.
Yeah, it certainly is. In your qualifications, where did you go to undergrad? Where'd you go to school, and how long have you been practicing?
Sure. I graduated from UT's business school in 1999 with an MIS degree, and went back to school a few years later after working in the real world, and graduated from UT Law School in 2005. And I've been licensed since November of 2005, and have been practicing in Austin and in the real estate market ever since.
Great. So we will likely talk about the NAR lawsuit for the majority of the talk, just simply because I think that's what most people are most interested in. We're also going to discuss data implications of the Follow Up Boss. I'm sorry, the Zillow acquisition of Follow Up Boss. So we're going to get started with the NAR lawsuit. We will probably, cut that and make sure we have at least 10 minutes or so to talk about Follow Up Boss, because we've had internal discussions about the lawsuit for quite a while, and there are a lot of interesting topics to discuss. So we'll try to get through all of them and still have a little bit of time for the data implications. With that said, Adam, I'll let you take it away on the lawsuit. You and I spoke this morning, and you have a lot of thoughts on it that are really interesting.
Sure. So first and foremost, if anybody isn't aware of the suit, in a federal district out of Missouri, some plaintiffs that are heading up a class filed a class action lawsuit against the top 4 real estate firms in Missouri, and that are coincidentally national firms, along with, importantly, the National Association of Realtors, claiming that they combined and conspired to violate specifically the Sherman Antitrust Act and some other local state statutes. But most importantly, the allegations are that they engaged in anti-competitive practices that are prohibited by federal law, and that's why the case was filed in federal court. Recently, and I think it was either Friday of last week or Monday of this week, the court released its ruling, which was a $1.8 billion judgment against the defendants for the plaintiffs. And the plaintiffs are there's 5 or 6 named plaintiffs, but they represent all similarly situated folks that sold property in the state of Missouri in a 5-year period. So that's a lot of people.
Yeah, and from my perspective, the plaintiffs, they just chose the big guys. Who can they get the most money from? And then that will naturally, whatever happens here, it's going to trickle down or cascade down to everyone else's business practices. Is that true?
I think so, and I think what you'll see is what happens in the legal world when one of these big verdicts happens in Missouri, for example. You can bet there's a bunch of plaintiffs' lawyers out there seeing 1.8 followed by all those zeros, going, well, how do I do that in Texas? And I think that's really what the concern would be. This lawsuit really doesn't affect a licensed broker in the state of Texas or in Canada. But it may have implications that are further reaching than this lawsuit itself.
We can thumb wrestle over if people dislike lawyers or real estate agents more after this. So yeah, man, lawyers coming after that money.
That's right. Well, I've heard more lawyer jokes than I have real estate agent jokes, but there's at least enough of both.
Right. Great. So, I do want to ask you about future suits and whatnot. And there already have been some additional lawsuits that have been filed. But first, what is the likelihood of appeal on this case?
Well, I would suggest 100%. Not only have the lawyers stated they're going to appeal, as I've been sorting through literally thousands of pages of these pleadings over the last few days, trying to get my head wrapped around the crux of what this is about. They have made some additional filings that you make when you're preparing for an appeal. But if you have a number in a verdict that has a billion in it,
Right.
it's going to be appealed. The economics are such that you have to appeal that. The cost of the appeal is teeny tiny compared to $1.8 billion.
Got it. And what is the timeline for this appeal? And then after that, is there a potential second appeal, and what would the timeline look like on that appeal?
Sure. So just rough numbers. I'm not really familiar with which federal circuit the Missouri district courts appeal to, but in general, it takes about 12 to 18 months to get through a federal circuit court appeal, and it could be longer. And in a case like this, where you would expect to see amicus briefs being filed by, other real estate associations, other state associations of realtors, there's going to be a lot for the circuit court to sort through. So if this ultimately turns out to take 2 years to resolve through the federal circuit, you won't see me being very surprised.
Got it. So roundabout, 2 years time, 18 months wouldn't be a surprise. 2.5 years time wouldn't be a surprise. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. And because it does involve a federal question, meaning it's a federal statute that is effectively the substance of the claim, this one could very well be taken up by the Supreme Court as well. And that could take another 12, 18, 24 months to flow through. So, anywhere from 2 to 4 years could go by before we have an ultimate resolution of this case.
Got it. So what do you think, the likelihood of this being overturned? And this is when we talked this morning, you weren't as rosy about this as I was. I think that you're much more of an expert on this than I am. So I will 1,000,000% look to your judgment. What do you think the likelihood is that it gets overturned on appeal?
Well, that's going to be tough. If you just look at appeals in general, the last time I looked at for instance, Texas state cases, the appellate courts have about a 9% overturn rate, meaning if you file any appeal, you've got about a 9% shot of overturning the lower court's result. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a 9% chance here, because so many other things go into this, but there's a lower chance that it gets overturned than not. And in coming to that conclusion, I've also looked through the court's rulings. I've looked through the law. I've looked through the arguments made by both sides. And I'm not the federal circuit court justice that's going to ultimately make the decision. So it really doesn't matter all what I think. But the arguments on both sides are pretty well reasoned. And if you'd like, I've boiled it down to the one argument that I think the court has hung its hat on it, and it's really this: the plaintiffs in this case, and it took me a little while to figure out what they were talking about, referred to something that they called the adversary commission rule. Now, I went to the National Association of Realtors website. I went through the handbook. I searched for those words, and they don't appear anywhere in there. And so from time to time, lawyers will take a group of rules or a scheme, and they'll just give it their own name. That's right. What the plaintiff's lawyers did here. What I figured out the mandatory commission rule means is actually the mandatory offer of compensation. And my understanding of the mandatory offer of compensation is that when you list a property for sale on the MLS as the seller's broker, you are required to offer compensation, either a set amount of money or a percentage of the gross sales price, to the buyer's agent. And what they really focused on was the National Association's rule, which I understand may or may not be enforced, but is certainly within the handbook, that says that a buyer's agent is prohibited from making a part of their offer to the seller a reduction in the commission paid to the buyer's agent. And we can talk about all the reasons why the National Association of Realtors would have that in there, why that's actually probably been a benefit to buyer's agents for a long time. And we can also talk about, why it's probably loosely enforced. But that's what the court and the plaintiffs focused on, is the fact the buyer has no ability to negotiate with their own agent the amount that agent will ultimately get paid. Right. And that is the interference with competitive practices that both the plaintiff and the court alleged violate the antitrust provisions of the Sherman Antitrust Act.
No, and when we talked, I was surprised at that rule. I have never seen that rule enforced, especially going through this incredibly high demand environment that we did. We see offers all the time that say reduction in buyer's agent commission, and I've not personally ever said no, you have to take that full amount. And as we discussed, rebates not from our firm, but there are plentiful agents, plentiful brokerages that like outwardly advertise rebates. It sounds to me like the crux of the argument is that the way they say that it's anti-competitive because a buyer has to seek a rebate rather than just hiring an agent at a lower rate. Is that correct?
That is correct. It seemingly suggests that the buyer's agent kind of throws their hands up and says, "Look, I'm taking whatever the seller offers on whatever house you end up picking. Right. It doesn't have anything to do with our relationship. I can't negotiate with you to take 1% or $500 or whatever you and I might agree on. We're at the mercy of whatever the seller's agent offers. And because I'm part of this guild, the National Association of Realtors, I have to accept their rule, and I can't negotiate, so it's out of my hands," which is probably not really how it works.
Yeah. 20,000 agents in Austin. So are all lawyers the same? Are all agents the same? They're not. In my career, I have certainly seen many agents say, oh, the commission, don't worry about that. The seller pays that. That's something that I think everyone on this call has heard or maybe has said. I probably said that early in my career. And this, Adam, is where, our conversation earlier went to a less legal conversation, more of a, market dynamic conversation. And we discussed, communicating value. You're such a smart guy, and you immediately arrived at a lot of the same things that I think we did. How do you see it from a practice perspective if agents have to be paid by the buyers?
Sure. So let me say one more thing about the lawsuit that kind of brings me into this conversation. One of the arguments that the plaintiffs were making is, look, it's 2023. Who needs a buyer's agent? All you need is the internet. And if you go on Zillow or you go on Google, you can just look for homes. And then once you find the one you want on the internet, which as everybody on this call knows is probably not the best way to decide whether you want to buy a house or not, is to look at 9 pictures on Zillow. But once you've decided what you want to buy, according to the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, then you just find an agent who can kind of walk you through the process and help you fill out the standard form and submit it, and then walk you through the title policy. And I think that what that really misses is the difference in agents and the difference in personalities, the value propositions that various buyers agents bring to the table. And I think if there is some pressure on commissions, whether it's downward pressure or just pressure to open it up to the market, what you're going to find is buyers agents having to sell their value proposition, whatever that is, whether it's I'm the lowest cost, whether it's I know this market better than anybody else, whether it's I'm the neighborhood expert for Steiner Ranch, or I'm the guy that knows East Austin. I'll help you get into Southwest Austin. I know all the school. It's going to be, you're going to see a lot more buyers agents having to compete that way, I think, if the downward pressure comes on prices.
And so I'll share something that I shared with our office and shared with you earlier. You would agree that there's been transparent pricing on the seller side, since the dawn of time, right? I mean, we've signed these agreements.
Sure.
Yeah. So those market dynamics exist on listings, and internally, we average 2.55% on the seller side. So that what it does is it does force the agent to consider the package deal and decide if they're willing to accept, a lower rate on that deal. So on the seller side, it's dynamics like, how reasonable is this seller? How great is this house, and where do they plan to price it? Things like that. We'll have to develop some skills on the buyer side, ask some questions, sort of, maybe not straight interviewing questions, but throw in those interviewing questions. And Adam, you guys have had to communicate value and in a very transparent way discuss pricing since you've been in business. How do you decide if you're going to work with a client, if they want to work with you? What's your process?
Well, sure. I mean, as a lawyer, it's pretty simple. I've been doing this for a long time, so just naturally, the referrals I get are generally within my practice area. The folks referring people to me generally know what I do, and they're pretty good at referring folks my way. But every once in a while, certainly someone will call me up. They'll say, "Hey, Eric said you're a great lawyer. I just got hurt in this car accident. Can you help me?" Well, no, I don't do personal injury. That's fine. So first and foremost, it's figure out if this is my kind of case. And that's really what the first, few minutes of any conversation I have with a client is am I actually the right lawyer for you? And if we figure out that, sure, I can help you, then the conversation shifts to, okay, well, let's find out more about what your case is. And then I'll tell you how I think, I would like to approach the case in general, what my strategy would be. And here's why I think that's an effective strategy. And then the client needs to decide whether that makes sense for them. And so it's really kind of a dynamic process that I imagine is very similar for what you do.
There is a difference, though. Yours is a bit harder, because if I want to engage with you and we don't have a previous relationship, first thing you ask for is a retainer, correct?
Certainly.
Yeah,
certainly.
So you're asking them, write a check so that we know we're working together. On our side, and people are chatting about buyer's rep agreements right now, which this is the solution to the issue. Right now, you don't need a buyer's rep agreement. There's something called implied agency that does require that we still have to act as fiduciary, and it works really well. A buyer's rep agreements work for a lot of agents, and a lot of agents that operate without them, it also works just fine. The reason for that is that the MLS listing is also a legal agreement for the listing agent to pay that buyer's agent. Well, if that goes away, we need a legal agreement that we are going to get paid. So that would be, some sort of engagement contract that you have. The difference is that there's a high likelihood that the buyer commission will be paid at closing, and it will be rolled into the loan. So it will be financed just as it is today. Would you agree? I know we talked about this. It's not necessarily your area of expertise, but markets really well. And wouldn't you agree that that's the likeliest outcome in this worst case scenario?
Well, it has to be. I mean, whether we say the seller's paying their agent, the buyer's paying their agent, the money's coming from the buyer. I mean, the proceeds of any real estate transaction 100% come from the buyer in almost every single situation. And so I think that's exactly where it's going, is it will always be financed somewhere or the other.
Yeah. And so Max Lehman and I, and he had literally he wanted to be here really badly, and he had a meeting that could not be moved.
We were last night.
So what we talked about is there are FHSA guidelines that dictate Fannie Mae Freddie Mac guidelines, and right now there are some limits to what can be paid. You mentioned, Adam, that you thought that commissions could not be paid from the loan. Max wasn't worried about. He didn't mention that. He said that the monetary limits were 6% total. If you put down, if the buyer puts down more than 10%, 3% total if they're putting down less than 10%. At the end of the day, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they're in the business of loaning money, and they have stated goals of helping affordability. So would you agree that it would go against those goals if they didn't allow the commission to be rolled into the loan?
Yeah, I think that as these, as the National Association of Realtors pushes down some modified rules, if buyers really are going to be permitted to negotiate with and pay, directly the commissions, those guidelines will have to change as the market changes. And I wouldn't be too concerned about that. You know, I brought it up in our conversation because it was mentioned throughout the lawsuit as one of the factors, you know, dictating why the market works the way it does. But I think they'll change as we go. So because if there was a prohibition against buyers being able to pay their brokers in the financing guidelines, you're going to destroy the market, and that's most certainly not in Fannie Mae's interest.
Yeah, there's some chat right now talking about the different guidelines for VA, FHA, and those are all great points and important details to look at. From my experience, FHA guidelines, VA guidelines, FHSA, which again dictates Fannie Freddie, they're all, you know, relatively parallel. They differ slightly here or there. Each of those organizations states that they want to improve affordability, and, you know, requiring that a buyer write a check from their bank account to pay for a large closing cost is not going to meet that goal. So I would say these are details that we should certainly look at and monitor. I will be tactfully lazy and ask some good friends who are lenders to monitor that for me and make sure it's going in the right direction. But I do think that there's an almost higher than 99% chance that will work itself out in this scenario, that the sellers can no longer pay a buyer agent commission. Do you think that's a safe strategy?
I think so. I mean, you know, if these deals can't happen the way that the market is dictating that they happen because of underwriting guidelines, you can bet those mortgage brokers are going to start putting some pressure to change that so that they can continue to underwrite deals. I mean, if it destroys their industry, you can bet they'll be advocating to change it.
Right. And so we're discussing right now sort of a worst case scenario for agents, right? I mean, there are merits of this case to the consumer, like, you know, shining a light on the commission. You know, I strongly believe that you know, good agents will rise to the top here because good agents know how to communicate value, and they do provide value. There will be other agents perhaps that their communication of value, these are still good agents, right? Their communication of value is low cost, right? So it will shine a light on that, arguably maybe good for the consumer, but not good for agents, right? I don't know that we can predict the likelihood of that scenario versus the others. What do you think are relatively certain outcomes on this, like in terms of like policy changes, things like that?
That's so difficult. What I can say is that there's changes in the market. This lawsuit may be one of the first of its kind. And in order to avoid further lawsuits, some very simple changes can be made, which, if those changes are made, regardless of whether it's the National Association of Realtors, the Texas Association of Realtors trying to get out in front of it before they even get guidance from the national level, what you're going to see is the market opening up. And I think when that happens, it's exactly what you said. The good agents who are good at communicating value are going to continue to do that. I think you'll see additional specialization. You know, you'll see folks becoming, like I said, the neighborhood expert, or, you know, the one bedroom expert. You're going to find additional specialization and marketing to specific buyer agent groups versus what you see now as more of kind of general marketing. I think it will be good for the consumer. I think it'll be good for the agents as well. And it'll be good to have to define yourself, come up with a brand, and that's always good. Right. So I don't see this as really negative. You know, if you weren't able to justify that 3% previously, well, then it will be difficult to start justifying it now. But I'd start thinking about it. But it seems to me that it may change the market. It may create an opportunity to innovate. But I would imagine that as we go, we're not going to see much, if any, of a decrease from 6%, you know, to something way less. And I don't think you're going to see a huge disparity in what sellers and buyers agents receive as compensation, because I just don't think the market will stand for that either. So I think we'll see some changes. We'll probably see some technology show up that we wouldn't have otherwise seen. But I don't, as big of a verdict as it is, as big of a change in the way we think about it as it kind of seems right now. It seems like a real watershed moment. I think the changes will be gradual and probably beneficial.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting while you're talking about specialization, throughout my own career, you start and what's your specialization? Well, it's like whoever will work with you, you know what I mean? That's my specialization. And you have a hard time communicating value. And as you get better, you learn who your customer is, you learn what it is that you do. I will say that every time I have tightened up my own specialization, my own specialty, I've been very happy with the results. So one story, whenever I was a real new agent, I lived in Southwest Austin, and I helped somebody buy a house in Sun City. I'd never been to Sun City before. It was a pretty miserable experience for me because it was a 2-hour round trip drive every time I wanted to go up there, and didn't really know this kind of different market. I tried really hard. I did a good job for the guy. He was happy with my services. I decided I'm never going to, sell in Sun City again, because it just didn't make sense. And then as we keep tightening it down, generally speaking, you as an agent are happier, you're providing better service, and you can certainly communicate your value better whenever you've tightened up your specialty. So quick question from Joanne, which I think is pretty good, because I do think that it could be construed that you and I are discussing as though this is a certainty that buyers will have to pay for the buyer side commission. She said, would it be that sellers cannot pay the buyer's agent, or that they won't be required to pay? And I know that this is a we're not sure yet question, but how do you answer that, Adam?
Well, certainly not. If anything, it's going to open up opportunities and not foreclose on them. And so sellers agents will always be able to offer to pay the buyer's agent commission.
Are you sure about that? That was the seller's agent, because that's the crux of the issue. If the seller's agent, I will say this, if the seller's agent can always offer compensation, market dynamics are going to be such that there wouldn't be a lot of change.
Well, exactly. The crux of it was not that the seller was paying it, it's that the buyer was prohibited from offering to reduce it. And okay. So just to use simple numbers, if we've got a house that's for sale for $100,000, and we know that if it sells for $100,000, the seller's agent is going to pay is going to receive 6%, and the buyer's agent knows that. The buyer's agent could not submit an offer saying, "Listen, we'll give you $98,000, and I'll take $1,000 for my commission," and that's what was prohibited. So it will not prohibit the seller's agent from offering to pay the commission. It would then just allow the buyer's agent to negotiate, "Hey, I'll take less." That's really the crux of the claim.
Well, so the worst case scenario that we've been discussing is worse than I thought it was potentially going. I mean, the worst case scenario is better than I thought it was going to be. Max and I, when we discussed it, we said the crux of this issue is which side of the settlement statement will the commission land on, and if they disallow the buyer's agent commission being paid on the seller side, if they say that can never happen again, sellers are not allowed to pay the buyer's agent commission. There are ways around that. I mean, we can do, add it to 12A1B, things like that. But if it always has to sit on the buy side, then it's a done deal that we always have to have this conversation. Does that make sense? What everyone is really afraid of is that sellers will be disallowed from saying, "Hey, we're going to offer a 3% commission to the buyers."
If that's what you're worried about, don't be worried. I mean, that's not a potential result. I mean, the National Association of Realtors, I suppose, could come up with that as a solution, but it's a bad solution for all the reasons you're worried. So I don't think that's what's going to happen.
It could certainly open up, more like creativity in the market. Right now, I think I'd have to run the numbers, but my gut is that 99% or more of the listings on the market are offering 3%. So, we might see more sellers that are offering 2% or experimenting with 1%. I don't know how successful that will be, but agents might see that a little bit more. The net result, I think that if we learn to communicate value in a better way, and it becomes an industry standard to get a buyer's rep agreement, I think is ultimately good for the good agents.
Yeah, one of the arguments that that the court bought in this case that I thought was a terrible argument was that look, the defendants were saying, well, look, if you're a seller, you can already offer less commission to the buyer's agent if you want. And the plaintiffs came back and said, yeah, but that'd be crazy because you've got all the sellers out there offering 3%. So now you're going to get less showings.
Right.
And well, that's the market pressure.
Right.
That's not collusion. That's not a conspiracy. That's if you offer less money, you will get less people. That's just, Adam Smith, 1801 economics, And so I found that to be extremely strange that the court was fooled by repackaging a market pressure as these crazy realtors out there colluding to rip people off. And the way they even described it, it's like you're describing economics. It's a free market. And so that would be one way that this gets overturned, is that the Court of Appeals goes, wait a minute, this isn't collusion. It's just, if milk is $5 a gallon everywhere,
right,
then why are you going to sell it for $4.50 unless it's just to sell more milk? But if you do, you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just economics. It's not collusion.
I completely agree. So one sort of question, and I guess it's really a statement, and then leading into a question. Actually, no, it's not a question. They're both statements that I think we can discuss. So he says, what Adam described happens in practice already. Buyer agents reduce commissions all the time. And I think what I was surprised of this morning when we talked was that when we reduce commissions, like in practice, it's against the NAR rule, right? And we do it in ways you can always rebate. A lot of times that rule, I've never seen it enforced. So it's already, the market has already put this pressure on our practices that we're not being enforced, of the rules in question were not being enforced. So I'm not sure what this really does from a market dynamic perspective. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, if it's already not being enforced, and I don't know anything, but it seems to me that the National Association of Realtors created that rule to help buyers agents, so that when if their client were to say, hey, wait a minute, why don't you take 1% instead of 3%, and let's make this offer contingent on that. The rule lets you go, sorry, I can't do that.
Right.
But in practice, buyers agents are going, yeah, let's do it. Let's see if we can't make this deal happen.
I think, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. That was all I was going to say is.
And so I will say the agents that need to work on their own practices are agents that say some form of that, don't worry about it. The seller pays it. Oh, I can't change it because the seller pays it. There's a comment right here that said, I read one of the problems that buyer can't see the buyer's agent commission in the listing. Anytime I was working with buyers, I would hand them the agent version because I was lazy. I didn't have to print out 2 copies, and the commission was right there. And I remember feeling funny about it at first. And then I was like, oh no, it's once you can communicate your value, and they say, well, how much are you being paid on this? And I would always say, well, I generally get paid 3, sometimes it's a little bit less, sometimes it's a little bit more. I don't worry about it. I generally just try to represent you as best I can. There's another version of that a lot of really great agents do. And that's, I always get paid 3. And, if the listing happens to be paying less, then you'll have to make up the difference. But we can always ask for the closing costs, things like that. But the commonality is you can't be afraid to talk about how much money you're making and explain why it is that you make so much money. These commissions are really high. There's no question about that. Anybody who says the commissions are not high is delusional in my book, right? But the reason that they're so high is because we're operating on, contingent payment. So there are certain times that we work really, and Steve Crossland communicated this really well a couple of days ago. There are certain times that we work for months and we earn $0. There are certain times that, we take a buyer out for a weekend and we get it under contract, and then we work for 30 days and not 30 full days, and we earn a lot. And that looks like a pretty gross overpayment if you only look at that one easy transaction. But we all know how rare easy transactions are, and we all know how common really difficult transactions are. If you can communicate that, I think you're fine, right? I think I would love to see innovation, and I think it would fail, where a brokerage says, hey, we're only going to charge you 1%, but it's going to be up front. you're going to need to pay us the 1% retainer, and that's all we're going to earn. I don't know any buyers, I don't say many that would prefer to pay on a $700,000 house, $7,000 up front versus this sort of like future money that's not real because it's being financed. They will all pick 3%, or if there's downward pressure, 2.5%, whatever it is. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I don't know that we earn any less money in that scenario, that the market shifts and buyers are paying for commissions up front at a reduced rate. Does that make sense to you?
It makes sense to me. I agree with you. I think that it's psychology, and even if you would do better to pay up front, you're going to see the vast majority, if not everybody, choosing the alternative.
Yeah. So question for you here, and we didn't talk about this before, so I don't think it'll stump you because not much does. Who pays the $1.8 billion judgment, right? So all they said was it's National Association of Realtors, and we don't generally name names, but it's literally Keller Williams in the suit. So it's KW and it's NAR. How does this get paid?
Well, since it's pending on appeal, and it's a class action, I'm not familiar with the Missouri rules, but I don't think they're going to have to post what's generally called a supersedious bond in order to appeal it. I think they automatically stay the judgment while it's on appeal. But ultimately, if they were to lose, it would be jointly and severally, because they did find that there was a conspiracy. I mean, it's a finding of a conspiracy to violate the Sherman Antitrust Act. So they would be jointly and severally liable. So you'd have these named defendants, plus the National Association of Realtors on the hook for the total amount.
So, and they would have to negotiate between the two to figure out how they're going to split the settlement. Is that effectively it?
Effectively, that'll happen. I mean, if they can't come to an agreement, then the plaintiffs can start executing on their judgment, meaning garnishing bank accounts and writs of execution and all that kind of stuff. So it would probably result in at least a couple of these entities filing some kind of bankruptcy protection. But that's hard to predict, and it's probably years away.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is, where it goes. And I don't think we want to air all that potential dirty laundry here, but like, is it existential at that point in time? Right. That's a legitimate question. And it very much could be. And with these follow-up lawsuits, I think, and we don't need to name them because everybody here is with different companies and whatnot, but I think there were 4 additional plaintiffs now named. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is just as soon as they got their verdict on this one, they filed another lawsuit against the next 4. And here's my prediction on that. Because of the win in this first lawsuit, I predict settlements in the follow-up lawsuit. Because
did you see the earlier settlements too against the firms that did settle? So if you're the plaintiff, dream scenario, right? Because you're probably never working again after this.
Right.
But what do you accept? Like on these new lawsuit, the others settled for around about $100 million per. What would you go after on these?
I mean, I think you're looking at a percentage of gross revenue, probably in the 5 to 10% over, the last 5 years because of the statute of limitations. So that'll just depend on how big these firms are and what their gross revenue was. But I think if they can pay, first and foremost, it has to be an amount they can pay and still survive, right? It can't be all their money. So it'll have to be a percentage of their gross revenue that they can afford to pay and still exist. But because it's such a giant chunk, it could be big numbers.
So I'll say, I don't think I'm a huge target because we're a mid-sized brokerage in Austin, but after this, let's block an hour at your office, and I want to run through our current policies and how we need to document them. We operate in exactly the way that I've discussed. It's very defensible. I think that does need to be documented, and maybe some an additional disclosure on the buy side and the sell side.
Well, and one thing I just point out, it wasn't necessarily directly on point with respect to the causes of action in the case, but some of the evidence that the court cited in its judgment for why it thought there really was this collusive idea is they had these scripts on some of these websites, and the title of the website was like, how to protect your 3%, you know?
Yeah.
And it was like, well, so if the buyer says something like, hey, can you take less than 3%? You know, they taught you not to say no, but to explain why you weren't doing it.
Yeah.
And so it was the court didn't like it because it seemed underhanded, even though nothing in the scripts was untrue. So I would probably avoid publishing to your agents things like how to not give a buyer a discount stuff.
We have, and we don't use scripts because we believe in like fundamentally understanding and communicating things. But yeah, no, so we talk about who's your customer, what do you do? And so who we are is we offer full service, full service brokerage, like we offer great service to our clients, and we earn a less than discount, like we earn a full service commission, right? That the market dictates. That's what we say. And that can change, obviously. Right now in Austin, on the buy side, that's roughly 3%. On the sell side, it's also 3%. And that's what we always pitch. But we certainly train that whenever a seller asks for a discount or a buyer asks for a discount, that is a business decision that you need to make, and you need to communicate your value and decide if you want to lower the commission in that instance. That's the smart thing to do. It's a business decision. So yeah, we'll talk and we'll make sure that we have it documented correctly, what we're doing in practice. And like I said, I'm a small guy, so I hopefully don't get sued over this, but I think that we're pretty defensible there. So
sure.
Great. So a couple chats here asking to move along to the Follow Up Boss acquisition by Zillow. And I'll start by saying, yeah, I mean, I was one of the very first Follow Up Boss users in 2012. I'm close friends with the founder. I couldn't be happier for these guys. It's an amazing company. Founder's an incredible human being. And yeah, they knocked it out of the park. I was really disappointed that they sold to Zillow, because I think there is a big misalignment in culture between the two companies. And I think there's a big misalignment in long-term goals between Zillow and their ultimate customer, which are agents. I have a number of concerns about this relationship. My personal concerns are not data, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm happy to talk individually. We will likely do another one of these with one of my good friends. He's in big data and he's an AI guy. And we've talked about this a ton. But I know everyone is really, really concerned about data. And so the first question I have for you, Adam, is the top line question I get from a lot of agents is, can Zillow steal my leads now that they've bought Follow Up Boss? Can they contact my leads? What do you say to that?
I would still say no. Even though the terms of condition or the terms of service on the Follow Up Boss website and contained within the software is pretty broad. I think that simply because Zillow has acquired Follow Up Boss does not now give them the right to violate the other obligations of not directly competing with you. I just don't think they would be in a position to do that. I think there's a number of legal reasons why they couldn't do that. And I think from a market perspective, what you'll see is Follow Up Boss likely in the near term amending those terms of service to assuage all of the concerns of folks that don't want to see that happen.
Yeah.
And I just think otherwise you'd have some issues. And look, I can analyze a federal lawsuit out of Missouri pretty well. Analyzing the motives behind a merger and acquisition like the one that we're discussing now, why Zillow would need Follow Up Boss it is hard to really wrap your head around. Does Follow Up Boss, I don't know Follow Up Boss technology enough to understand, but is there something fundamentally awesome about Follow Up Boss that Zillow couldn't reproduce?
Yeah, it's a user thing. I've been pretty deep in tech for a long time, and anytime you look, and our developers, whenever they heard the news, they said, "We'll just build it." I'm like, okay. It's always easier to say that, and it always takes 10 times longer and it's 10 times more expensive to do it. But they could build it. They certainly could. Zillow could. What they can't build is they can't build the user base. So they have 30,000 paying agents that are using the system. And when you get that feedback, the system continues to improve. And I don't know. I'm skeptical that it was a data play because data is just so cheap. But potentially the data, what Zillow could use the data for if FUB doesn't tighten up their terms of service. And Zillow's, I'll say it out loud, they're malicious. I mean, they do not like agents. They've proven, they've been here since 2007, I think. So whatever that is, 16 years of saying one thing and then immediately with very little time doing another. So I don't trust them in any way, shape, or form. So if Zillow doesn't, if Follow Us doesn't tighten up their terms of service, what they would be allowed to do with it is to market, meaning like advertise, digital advertising, things like that, based on user behavior. And this would add to the data that they already have. It would add to the data profiles of each user that they already have. So that would be one benefit. That would be one benefit to it. Sorry, I kind of started talking about that.
No, I think that's exactly where the analysis ought to be, is trying to figure out what value Follow Up Boss adds to Zillow's.
Sorry, that was your question. I didn't answer that. So they like to be as vertically integrated in the real estate market as they possibly can. So they bought Dot Loop 10 or 15 years ago. I can't remember the exact time. They bought a lot of like leasing portals, things like that. They ultimately want to sell houses. Why are they buying leasing? Well, it's because they're getting visitors into that sort of funnel. I think that they have a lot of cash, and the purchase price that they gave to FUB was actually market, believe it or not. Those tech companies trade on annual recurring revenue, and they traded at a 10x, which is good. It speaks to like, hey, it's a good company, but it wasn't something that they bought and you said, oh my God, who would possibly pay this? Simply because it traded at a reasonable multiplier, if that makes sense. So yeah, and like you said, it's hard to guess exactly why they would want it, but it does track with some other purchases they've made. So
yeah, and so if there are legitimate business considerations that can substantiate this, then that helps you not be so worried about the potential nefarious reasons that they might purchase such a storehouse of data. It's probably some other good reason that might still be bad for agents, but not in the way you would think. Personally, they're going to come in and steal my leads.
Yeah, exactly. And that's honestly a death blow to the company, and they might as well light $500 million on fire if they start stealing leads. There's a comment here that says Z has been on a mission to eliminate NAR and local MLSs for years, and that is 100% true. Zillow was founded by Rich Barton, who founded Expedia, who disintermediated travel agents, put them out of business. And he said, "Oh, I did this with travel agents. I can do this with realtors." The way that Zillow realizes their valuation and the way that they get more market share is to become the market, right? That's with the data. That is if they become a marketplace where we go to first to input our listings, they now own the data. Right now, the data and where we go for the marketplace, it's the MLS. It's these 600 organizations that collectively are incredibly powerful, and they're all distributed throughout the United States. So, from my perspective, this is they are putting themselves more into the transaction. They're becoming more potentially integral to a lot of agents throughout the United States. It gets them one step closer to getting agents to input the listings directly with Zillow. That's the death blow to organizations if agents start inputting those listings directly with Zillow. Does that? I mean, Adam, is that? I'm asking you as though you're an agent or something like that. It's because everybody else is muted. But does that track with what you would think? Just a smart person. Just a smart person.
No, it does. It sounds right to me. It's the industry's been changing now with the advent of Zillow and all the other technology for a while now, and I think there's been some resistance to that that may be futile.
Yeah. Well, is it an eventuality? And if that's the case, what's the timeline? That's really it. They thought it was an eventuality that was going to have a relatively short timeline in 2007. It's stretched out considerably longer. I don't know. I've done this, and I can't believe I'm saying it. I've done it now for 21 years. And, ever since got in the business, they've been trying to put agents out of business. When I first started, it was 1% realty that I was definitely afraid of because I couldn't communicate my value. They're out of business, then it was Zip Realty. They're out of business. Then everybody's deathly afraid of Zillow is going to put us out of business tomorrow, and they're still trying. So it's a weird thing, it is a wonky system, a wonky way to get paid. I think everybody would agree it's a little bit of a different type of industry. And for some reason, it seems to be the best one out there because the market dynamics keep bringing us back to where we are right now, which isn't to say that there couldn't be a better one. So, quick, I guess we're kind of wrapping up now. We have about 5 minutes left. If anybody has any questions that they want to chat in, we can look at them. We can ask them. There's been a good discussion over here on the side. Adam, what are your overall thoughts on, I think NAR, FUB, anything that you think that we didn't cover that you'd like to add at all?
No, not really. This is one lawsuit in Missouri. And so I think you have to take it for what it's worth. It is one lawsuit in Missouri. It may have far-reaching implications. It doesn't really affect you right now. It does lay out a game plan that a plaintiff's lawyer came up with that so far has been pretty effective. And it's worked to cause a couple of large firms to write big checks. So I think coming up with some mitigation strategies and avoiding some of the pitfalls that we've seen these other companies fall into would be a good idea. And then of course, just simply allowing for negotiations that apparently it's been alleged that the National Association of Realtors has discouraged would be a way to build a defense right now. But I think unless you're one of the top 4 or 5 largest real estate firms in the state, you probably can hide behind your relative size. Yeah. Because it doesn't make, it's just these are all contingency cases. These lawyers are all looking at this as a business transaction, and they just don't want to go after somebody where it's not, lots of zeros after the number.
What do you think? I know it's a guess, but just like I know that people usually get 3%. What do you think what do you think these lawyers are getting? What percentage on this case?
Oh, in a class action lawsuit, somewhere in the 50% of the amount.
$900 million. How many attorneys do you think are on this case? Like people, humans?
Dozens.
Okay. So each one of these guys, not quite 100 million per on this one case, but these guys just got a big paycheck. Somebody.
Well, they got a big judgment. There's a huge difference between a judgment and a paycheck. But they've made money on those settlements already. They probably used the funds that they got from those early settlements to fund this lawsuit, and they're going to keep going. So there's a question that says, is it treble damages? Well, the 1.8 billion included treble damages. So it's 1.8, done and done. It's still a big number. But they'll settle for less for sure. Because the individuals that make up the class, they'll end up getting checks for $100, a couple $100, something like that. Here's your settlement.
These attorneys are doing God's work, man. They're fighting for the consumer. So
that's the idea of class actions. The idea of class actions is that we're not always going to make every individual member of the class whole. What we're attempting to do is shut down predatory practices that affect the market and make these big changes in a big way. And that's certainly what those big numbers will end up doing.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough. To summarize, I think, everybody wants to know what's actionable, right? So to summarize, I think on the FUB side, monitor, see if you think that they might become more malicious with the data. I think on the NAR side, look at how you do business, right? I think the number one thing you can do is think about what it is you do and define your own value, and then get really good at communicating that to your buyers. And if you don't already use buyer rep agreements, you probably want to consider doing it. I don't think it's necessary to protect yourself or anything like that right now today. But if this goes poorly and we have to start using buyer rep agreements, I don't think it's the end of the world. And to be ready for that, prepared for that, and already have that in practice is probably a good defensible move. Would you agree with that?
I love buyer's rep agreements. I know that for a lot of buyer's agents, it's just not part of what you do. I think you can create a really solid buyer's rep agreement that that buyers will be happy to sign. I bet I could get it on one page.
We already have one from either NAR or Track. They're good. They're
Sure.
2 pages. Yeah.
Yeah, a 1 or 2 page agreement that isn't crazy legalese. It's impossible to understand, and that puts everybody on an even footing and describes exactly what the relationship's going to be. It also prevents, you know, the inevitable situation where somebody tries to cut you out of the deal.
Oh, that's good.
It'll prohibit that, and nobody thinks about that when they're signing it, but it prohibits it on the back end. I love buyer's rep agreements, and you can even have customized ones that are really, really simple.
I'll tell you, internally, we've discussed what ours will look like, and we'll probably just use the promulgated form. But in every listing agreement we have, we write a special provision that says, you know, seller can terminate this agreement with 48 hours notice, and we'll certainly do the same on our buyer rep agreements. And the reason for that is that we want our clients to work with us because we've communicated value and because we've proven value to them. And if that becomes how you do business, all you're doing is formalizing how you already work with this agreement. That's what we will plan to do with it. So, Adam, I can't thank you enough. This wasn't a pitch for everybody to use Adam, by the way, but I'll make sure and share his contact information with everyone. Someone just asked how they can get the recording. I'll have it up later today, and please share it with anybody you'd like to. You know, I'm very appreciative that everyone shows up to these. I really love thinking about stuff. It's how I sleep well, is by planning. So Adam, thank you for your part in it. You've been amazing.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me, and it's always a pleasure.
Awesome. Everybody have a great day today.